Hi, everybody. Let me make sure I've got sound adjusted. Can everybody hear me? Everybody hear me? Just wave if you can hear me. Okay, Carl, I'm assuming can. We should get a few more people in a minute. But several people, in fact, one group had two or three folks have Zoom conversations with legislators kind of competing with this.
That worked very well with Bill O'Neill. Yeah, we got a solid amount of time. The things that he was already 100% good on, we just blew right past and we got to the nitty gritty. So he asked good questions and we covered a lot of ground.
Good. Yeah, I'm getting nothing but positive feedback about this. And in fact, I heard from eGolf's office that they wanted to do another one. We're doing one with him tomorrow, and he wants to do another one in the second or third week of the session when things are a little more settled. And we also have one tomorrow with Worth. So we're meeting with the leadership of the legislature tomorrow, big time. So we'll give people a couple more minutes and then we'll do our usual check-in. And then Marianne Dickinson is here and will talk to us about collectives and housing and all things justice. I'm just keeping an eye on attendees. I can tend to forget that and then start the meeting and then look over and people have been sitting there for a bunch of time. You have to, so that Marianne, you have to admit people when they, and if you're not paying attention. By the end of the day, it's hard for me to multitask. And I'm looking at the screen. I'm not doing something else. It's just got a big screen to the left here, but the camera's on my laptop to my right. So you get the side of my face. But the right side, it's my good side.
That's one of the problems of these video conferences. And a lot of people use laptops or tablets and you're looking up their nose in their most flattering angle. I'm lucky I have a camera mounted above my monitor. So
can you send me information about that? That's actually something I want to get.
A camera above the monitor?
Yeah. Is it a clip-on kind of thing?
Mine, let's say it's not worth dragging my phone over here and trying to do it. Mine is a 5-year-old Logitech thing that just sits, has a weird little rubbery thing that lets it sort of shape itself and so you can point it at any angle. More modern one that my wife got just a few months ago has real high fidelity and incredible image processing that, like, my camera just washes out the window. She's backlit by a window and it balances.
Oh my God. Could you send me information about that, Carl?
I will do that. I will take it as an action item.
Okay. All right. Let's get started. There's nobody in the waiting room and I'll pay attention to that. So the way we historically start our meetings is to just sort of check in and see how we're doing. It's been this week was a little less tumultuous than last, but let's start with you, Joyce. How about you? How are you doing?
Let me unmute first.
Yeah.
It's been a hard week. I lost my companion, my dog, suddenly. So it's been a lot of grieving. I'm through it all. I'm really excited to hear Marianne because Marianne, I'm doing a piece on affordable housing and the elitist power grab that exists and searching into a lot of innovative models, not only in the US, but globally to bring in as potential ideas and recommendations for New Mexico to consider.
Okay,
Um,
Joyce, I just undid your video because
oh,
you're breaking up a little bit and it sometimes makes a big difference when there's no video. I
okay,
didn't just
gotcha.
decide to get rid of you.
Okay. Yeah, I did. I mean, I don't know if you all heard that, but this is why I'm looking forward to today's talk, Zoom, because I want to know more about how housing and worker cooperatives would function here in New Mexico and how we can proceed forward with creating them or expanding the creation of them.
Okay. Thank you, Joyce. How about you, Paula? You're next. Unmute.
Yeah, takes a second to click on the old thing.
Right.
Oh, Carl's going to go.
Yeah, don't want to talk over each other. Let's see. I've been kind of hiding and recharging my batteries the last month. I'm very happy to report that Trump's been impeached a second time. That's some good news. Meanwhile, on the transformations for imagining a clean environment, which is my topic, the thing that kind of had me put my brakes on is Cedillo Lopez has the Green Amendment ready to be filed. I've got an advanced copy of the amendment, or the bill, which is really straightforward. And that's the most transformative thing in terms of a clean environment that you can imagine, is getting that Green Amendment passed. There's some debate over whether it'll make it with a pushback from, oil and gas and all that. But that I put the brakes on the briefing and the literature review with the idea that I'm going to try and stay plugged in closely to the Green Amendment as it moves forward. I was checking the legislation list and it's not up there yet. I'm not sure if it's going to come in as a House bill or a Senate bill or both. They've got 4 or 5 senators, or excuse me, 2 or 3 senators and 1 representative who are co-sponsors. So I don't know where it'll show up first.
Well, so far the Senate bills that are being dropped are not going in the normal way, and so it's really hard to track.
That's probably where it's hiding then, because she's the spearhead for that.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go to Paula.
I'm fine. My daughter and her family have recuperated from COVID, so that makes me feel good. And thank you. And I'm very happy that the impeachment has gone through, and I look forward to Trump's finances going the same way, going downhill. I hope his businesses collapse. That's all I can say.
Well, without Deutsche Bank lending him money, I think there's a very good chance of that. So, yeah.
Well, I hope, yes, that's the hope.
Okay. Greg, I think you're next, and then me, and then Mary Ann.
Okay, hi. I'm been very worried about the drought. Paula Garcia of New Mexico Secretary Association sent out an email that just went on page after page after page of metrics. I didn't know they had so many metrics for drought. I thought it was just rainfall, but there's surface water metrics, groundwater metrics. There's even something called root zone metrics, and that's just part of it. And it's all really bad. It's looking really bad for the entire West. So I'm a little worried about that, but what can you do? No activism would help in that case, really, except that Melanie Stansbury's water, water bill, I think is going to be, it kind of rises in my mind as important.
Hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's not being introduced.
Not being introduced.
Right.
Oh, well, I don't like her so much anymore. And there's, I'm been pestering you about the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. That's taking effect January 22nd. And I hope a lot of people will show up at the corner of Cerrillos and St. Francis with masks on, 6 feet apart at least. We're going to, there's no media coverage of this. The elites in the United States have no interest in this. So we're trying to make it publicized. So I'll be bugging people about that.
Okay. As far as my check-in, I can't honestly remember juggling so many balls at once. And I'm just terrified I'm gonna, forget to do something really important, like tomorrow, Peter Worth's supposed to do the Zoom with him and 50 people at least. There's already 50 signed up. And then I forget and go have a glass of wine and watch the news. It's monumental, and the frigging session hasn't even started. That's my, but it's also like, I'm feeling like Retake is kind of taking it to a new level, and these Senate district constituent Zoom conversations are involving hundreds of people across the state, connecting with the legislature, their senators, before the session begins. And because of it, we've identified all kinds of places where legislators have key misunderstandings about bills, and then we're able to like tie them in with either the bill sponsor or a CBO that's pushing the bill. And as a result of it, it's having a great impact. And legislators are saying that they're finding it to be like the best input. We got a new person wanting in. The best form of input from constituents they have experienced. And so I think that this is year one doing it. And I think that we'll be doing it on an ongoing basis and really build on that. So that's really, really cool. We now have Karen Keeney here. Karen, can you give us a little check-in?
Hi, sorry. I was thinking it was at 5 o'clock. Too many Zoom meetings going on here. Check in about what in particular?
Just how you're doing.
Oh, well, hooray for impeachment.
You're not
That's-
alone in that check-in.
It's what?
You're not alone on that check-in.
I'm sure not. I am sure not. No, yeah, just trying to stay positive and not fall into the fear that they would love us to get wrapped up in. What a crazy time.
Okay, Mary Ann, would you like to check in, and then we'll give you about 15 minutes or so to lay out what you've been up to and how that might be relevant to what we're doing.
Okay. Well, I have been having a lot of asthma, and so and a lot of Zoom meetings and a lot of emergency calls for various, help me with this and that. So I may not be at the top of my form tonight, but yeah, well, I'll jump right into it because I have sort of a very diverse activist background, and it when I lived in New York City I moved there when I was a teenager, and started out with living in a slummy apartment and with a whole bunch of people from Ohio, interestingly. And they were all artists and dancers and singers and so forth. And so we at one point thought about, well, why don't we buy our tenement from our landlord, because he wasn't taking care of it and we could do better. We did, except that we didn't buy it. It's probably it's a good idea. But that whole idea of living together and living, us owning our living space in an apartment setting, was something that never really kind of went away and I had a long history of living in apartments. When I moved to New Mexico, to Santa Fe, in fact, I left an apartment in New York, a rent controlled apartment, paying $80 a month in 1980, and went to paying 4 times as much for a similar sized apartment in Santa Fe. So and being paid a quarter of what I would have been paid in New York for the work I was doing. So, immediately I saw that New Mexico was not a good place to earn money or to afford housing. And that just keeps proving out. When I moved to Santa Fe, it was 81 when I actually moved there. There was an hourglass economy, as I called it. And, they're very wealthy people, and some of them were living in their second or third homes. It wasn't even necessarily their first home. And then there were basically the kind of middle class educated folks, and that was the middle of the hourglass. And then there were the service people, the lower paid essential workers. And the middle class owning property, having a decent wage, etc., just was not happening, and it got worse and worse in Santa Fe. We moved to Albuquerque, and at least it was more affordable, but the situation of affordable housing, and that was personally needed, but I also was very concerned about how my husband became a builder. So we were very much involved with building in the Albuquerque area, but we weren't building affordable housing. We were building what made us a living, which was, again, middle class and up. I mean, some of it was just astonishing what people built, and I didn't even realize there was that kind of wealth in this state. Now, through a number of years, my husband passed away really early, and I didn't inherit the business. I didn't have a contractor's license, so I became much more involved in politics, and so doing things like door knocking made it very apparent what kind of housing situations there were for people living here. And elderly people were very much in a bad situation. We'd come knocking on their doors, and a friend and I would be doing door knocking, and we'd find that their homes were decaying. They may have been the original owners, and they couldn't maintain it. And it was very obvious to us that they were old and that they were vulnerable. So we became very concerned about that and started our own little, okay, let's convert this housing to be more handicapped accessible, deal with the issues of safety and both physical and whatever. And that wasn't working out because they didn't have money to improve the property, and they didn't really belong in these ranch houses that we have so many of in Albuquerque. And so we were thinking about, well, what would housing for older people look like, and how would they be safer, and how would they be less isolated, because they're very isolated in these homes. The neighborhoods have gotten very, much younger. So a friend and I, a very enlightened real estate broker, I tease her that she's one of the few that I know. She and I got very involved with the co-housing movement, and co-housing is similar to cooperatives, except that it operates a little differently. And I found after a while that it was kind of odd that co-housing doesn't use the cooperative ownership model. It's usually that you, trying to think, cooperative co-housing is a very communal kind of thing, except that you can have you would have your own unit. You manage everything together as a community, and there's a decision-making process. I don't know how much you know about co-housing, but it's, you know, something that basically came over from Europe 35, 40 years ago. And it's a very democratic situation. Everything is done by some form of democratic decision-making and a lot of mutual support. And I live in a co-housing community that I co-developed. And it's been very terrific during this COVID time. My neighbors are nearby. Part of the whole concept is that you're close and you're supportive and you do a lot of communication with each other, and that can sometimes be really hard. But cooperatives became something that came back to me as I was very involved with the food co-op movement in New York. Formed one, filmed them, did all sorts of work with organizing food cooperatives. But they're different than housing cooperatives. You can't really, well, you could say you're a consumer of housing, but most of the time, the work that's been done in forming cooperatives has either been around employee owned cooperatives or around consumer cooperatives, food co-ops and things like that. But there are many others. There are electric co-ops and credit unions are co-ops. There's so many that people don't even recognize are cooperatives. Now, people here in New Mexico don't think that there is any cooperative housing here, but I discovered early on that there are, in Albuquerque, 2 1970s era cooperative housing developments. And they're up in the Northeast Heights. And if you look at their websites, they're called, in case you're interested, Greenbrier Townhouses is one, and Echo Ridge Homes is the other. How that works is you buy a share in the cooperative association, which is a nonprofit type of corporation. And then the co-op decides based on what the groups, well, first let me backtrack. You buy a share in a corporation that owns the property. And so you have the right to occupy a space, an apartment, a townhouse, whatever. And the group decides how much, based on its overhead, how much the monthly rent, it's not really so much rent, is covering your overhead. It's your payment, your monthly payment that you pay over and beyond the cost of buying a share. Now, if you look at their rates, buying a share is somewhere around $15,000. You pay that once, and it's transferable. And in some cases, you, depending on how it's organized, you can receive equity on that, because part of it, the equity is reserved over and above. Okay, if I may be getting a little technical here, I'll save some of that for the Q&A. But anyway, the long and short of it is their monthly payments are less than rent in Albuquerque. Their cost, they actually end up getting equity if they decide to leave. And what really attracts me to that is that part where they can potentially have mobile equity. In other words, it's like owning a house and having the home increase in value, and it's wealth building. And that's one of the tools that hasn't really been looked at ever since. It's here. It's very common in certain parts of the country. The upper Midwest, places like Madison, and there's a hotbed of cooperatives of all sorts. New York has lots of cooperative housing units. but people think of cooperative housing as, you know, the fancy Park Avenue things that cost millions of dollars. Well, that's sort of an anomaly. That's not your typical co-op housing. So what my recent project was before last year's COVID and political craziness and police issues. I've gotten much more into the kind of justice issues. So this, it ties in, but it kind of put me on my project on pause. But there are really wonderful in Albuquerque there, and there's some in Santa Fe, not much, but there's a period of time between the world wars that it was very common to build apartments in sort of a U shape here. And they're fairly close to downtown, most of them. And so they're older and they need to be made green. Although the fact that they're in walkable communities near all sorts of services and transportation automatically gives them lots of credit for being green. And but you know, there's a lot of mechanical stuff that needs to be changed about them. So I identified one that was actually fairly historically significant, and some neighbors had some money to put up, and we really wanted to buy that and convert it to cooperative housing because it had been rental housing, and those had a lot of people interested, had great community support. The community loved the idea for a lot of reasons. It created a stable, invested resident population. It allowed people who live there and had never knew when their rent would be increased. They could have the stability and the power of their lives because they would be owners and they would be part of the decision making of, well, how much is my rent going to be? It's nonprofit. So right there, you have one huge benefit in terms of trying to make it affordable. But it was kind of a stretch to try to make it green and affordable without any kind of outside financing. And that's the problem that's been coming up for co-housing and for cooperative conversion, is that co-housing has been self-financed. What happens is people get together and they sell their homes or they have money somehow and they put it together and they get a co-housing started. Well, that isn't feasible for people of lower incomes or unreliable incomes. I've been a freelancer for most of my life. I mean, I've had a few steady jobs, but much more in the freelance, self-employed realm. And there are a lot of younger people who are, you know, gig workers, and they are not in position between college debt and you know, and a number of strikes against them. They don't have good credit usually, so they're not buying homes. So what we're finding is that there's not necessarily a shortage of housing. It's a shortage of affordable housing and access to credit or to capital. And if you want to add the step of making it, again, more permanently affordable, you want to have a green conversion. There's so much of our housing stock, about 98% of our housing stock in New Mexico doesn't meet any kind of green standards. And there's hardly any money. I mean, we're talking less than $1 million out there to do that kind of conversion in grants or things like that. And tax credits hadn't been applicable to a lot of rehabs. So that may change in this legislature. There's a bill that I understand the way the energy tax credits, and I'm not talking about solar. This is it's the green tax credits. They would allow financing for, tax credits for rehabs, which would really help the kind of project we were trying to do. However, somebody has to use the tax credits. So it's really between issues like zoning, which excludes a lot of congregate kind of housing. It's another thing that I got into, is trying to get zoning more friendly to affordable housing in various ways. And we had a coalition going for a while, the Albuquerque Affordable Housing Coalition, and it was so focused on, and this is the discussion that's in the paper right now, is the mayor is not putting enough money into housing or what's needed, but it's all one kind of housing. So what we've been trying to do, those of us who are active in affordable housing activism, we're trying to come up with other forms of housing or other ways of creating housing or converting housing. Because again, a lot of it is by owned, rental housing here is owned by outsourced, especially since 2008. So much housing, both homes and apartments, are owned by out of state, out of country investors. And Blackstone, you know, if you're familiar with Blackstone, they apparently they're the biggest landlord in the world, or certainly in the US, and they're expanding that globally. So I'm a big advocate for I think the co-op conversion is something that's very doable, but it's not something that's on anyone's radar. Again, I've been a little bit sidetracked, so I was going to be doing some communicating with city staff, because I think maybe going in through the green conversion path might be better than trying to do the housing. I have to say, I've worked on and off with Albuquerque administration with varied, not always good results. So I'm not encouraged that this is going to be something that happens very soon, but I think that things like the public bank really help put this on people's radar, because the public bank is one of those great opportunities to finance things like co-op conversions.
Right. Well, let's open it up for some questions, and I can't see if Joyce has a question, but I'm guessing she does. So if so, comment or question, Joyce. How does this segue or inform the work you're doing?
Well, the financing piece is a major conundrum, for sure. When I lived in New York City, moved there from Boston as a young woman, after a while, every time my landlords were raising my rent, our building also decided to purchase the building, and it was a long, long legal process. I eventually opted out because it was too much, and I bought a co-op because that's what I could afford versus a condo in New York City. And I have to say it was a great experience, and I often wondered why New Mexico hasn't embraced and adopted this model specifically for building and developing affordable housing. We are one of the poorest states in the country, and it's a question that requires attention. One of my questions is, are there any legal obstacles to creating affordable housing cooperatives here in New Mexico other than the financing piece?
Legally, no, it's actually extremely easy, easier than New York. Actually, our state has a specific category, cooperative corporation, and it's very easy to register, and you pretty much self-organize, and you submit your, your articles of incorporation, your bylaws, and, an annual report of who your directors are. So it's set up as a simple corporation, and where you get into a little more complexity is the taxation, tax and revenue. I know that with food co-ops, it's really more complex. With housing co-ops, I think the ongoing, there are property taxes to pay, and that all comes out of your monthly rent. And the other thing that is a good thing is there is a national co-op bank. It was established not long after I moved here, actually, and one of the principals, organizers, came out to New Mexico, and I think they were talking with a group of people in northern New Mexico to do a sheep raising cooperative. And I don't know what happened to that, but I know it exists for a while. But yeah, it's basically the startup money that's hard to locate. There's no mechanisms for that, for like buying the house, the buildings, or if you're going from scratch. There's nothing in the federal government housing in any kind of HUD programs that is specific for or helpful for forming co-ops. So they've been, historically, they were financed. I'm not sure how they were financed here, the two that exist here in New Mexico in the 70s, but in New York, it was mostly union funds. And in fact, it was a union bank that gave our co-housing community, they risked giving us a construction loan, but it's the first acquisition that's the biggest hurdle, and the rehab, if you have to rehab. But if you're building new, you have to build at much higher standards than a lot of the housing we were looking at. So there's that. And that, in fact, the HUD housing is such high quality and high cost. There's been a lot of criticism that new affordable housing is not very cost effective. It has to be subsidized. So we don't have any subsidies for doing cooperatives.
Any other questions from folks? And then if not, we'll let Mary Ann go, and oh, Carl, you got a question, and then we can move
Well,
on.
I'm kind of curious. My brother back in Vermont is an employee of an employee-owned business, which I take to be kind of a co-op. What's the intersection between the business side of things? Of course, for me, the only co-op I really understand is my La Montanita up the street, and then housing co-ops. What is the commonality there?
Actually, they all have the so-called co-op principles in common. They all operate under what was originally called the Rochdale principles. So they're basically democratically governed and support other co-ops. I can't remember the 7 principles, but I was afraid somebody was going to ask me that. But no, they're actually, they are the same thing. Legally, they're pretty much the same thing. And that's what Co-op Catalyst, which I was hoping would at some point be able to talk to you all.
Well, your remarks about building equity certainly apply to my brother. He got in as employee number 18, and now their company is wildly successful with over 200, and he's nearing retirement. So he done good.
Yeah, no,
the co-op model really works.
It does, and there's actually a hugely successful one in Spain called the Mondragon, and it's a collection of cooperatives. There may be about 200 that are in that whole system, and they're the best paid employees. And in fact, that's been the biggest demand, not co-op housing, but co-op employee-owned businesses is what's the biggest organizing is going on here.
There's over 70,000 employees in Spain in the Mondragon system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Wow.
enough.
It's one of the largest.
Marianne, this is Joyce again. I know that a lot is riding on the public banking legislation to pass and be enacted into law. Will that be a solution to the financing piece, which seems to be the biggest hurdle?
Potentially. What I was involved early on with the public banking effort 5-6 years ago, something like that. But I've heard lately that they've been narrowing the focus of what they might be using it for. And I would hope that housing, especially, it would be great for rural areas too. The thing that's really great about the co-op model, especially the conversion model, is there are a lot of towns around New Mexico that are losing population, but their housing is deteriorating. There's no investment in those places. And so a co-op model would allow investment, new investment. And if the co-op bank would do those kind of loans, credit unions, the co-op bank would probably give money to, would work through credit unions. And so the credit unions could be the ones that give those loans. And as I say, there are permanent mortgages available. So it's not like they would be on the hook for that loan for short term.
Okay, other questions? Okay, I want to thank you, Marianne. We have a little bit of business to take care of, and we appreciate the input you provided. You're actually, I think, the first person we've had like guest come in and present, and it might be a model we look at going forward. And but I want to thank you, and I hope that we get to work with the co-op Catalyst Co-op or Co-op Catalyst.
Co-op Catalyst, New Mexico.
Okay, thank you very much, Marianne. You can exit anytime.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Okay. Quick feedback. How did that work for you? I think it was probably very informative for Joyce, but as I was listening, I sort of wondered whether it would have been better to have just hooked up Joyce and Marianne. But did you find this informative?
Absolutely informative to hear her thoughts, her experience. But where to go with this is the next piece. It doesn't seem like there's any legislative initiative in this area currently, but that could change. I don't know of any senator or representative that is at the forefront of leading the charge to create more affordable housing. It's pretty much left to cities and individual developers. And we have very few freestanding affordable housing units in the state. The need is humongous. The supply is practically nil comparatively. So hopefully that's going to change in the near future. Probably not in this legislative session. Perhaps in the next year or two, something can develop. And I find it hopeful that something will, because I think there's a lot of strong support for public banking legislation to go through.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that does occur.
There is a housing omnibus bill that Andrea Romero and I think Geraldine Ferrari are advancing. I'm not sure about Ferrari, but Andrea is definitely part of it. So you might
Is it?
Yeah, you might want to check in with her. And it looks like a pretty promising bill.
Ferrari, okay.
Yeah, What about you, Carl? You were saying that you found it helpful, and Karen.
Excuse me?
I was just asking you, you had put your thumbs up, and so I was wondering how it felt for you, um, uh, how informative it might have been for you.
Well, I knew nothing about housing co-ops going into this, so it's all new to me. And that makes the value, incredibly high.
Okay, okay.
So and she was able to answer all our at least my newbie question about how co-ops fit together with everything there. It as a nice little chunk, it's not overwhelming in this world of getting Zoom avalanches. This is my third today, so it's appreciated that it's nice and an encapsulated topic.
Okay, what about you, Karen? You had your hand up.
Yeah, I did. And I too found it really informative because I don't know very much about this at all, particularly what's going on in New Mexico. I'm wondering whether for the functioning of this group, what you suggested a moment ago, it might be more effective to connect someone like that with someone like Joyce, who's actually doing the research first, and let that inform the research. And then when we're looking at the actual product, the actual brief, I guess we're calling them now, maybe that would be the time for a guest speaker like that. I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know.
Anybody else with comments? Looking like, Paula, are you? Yes.
Yeah, I didn't know about this, and I found it very interesting because on the one hand, you raised the whole issue of employee co-ops and working, and this is housing co-ops. And I know that back in the East, there were like Ambridge, Pennsylvania, there were places where people lived and worked. And of course, that's the kibbutz model. So this is like the third piece. It's like, and I found it interesting. I'd love to understand more about how it ties in with the public banking, because I think public banking sounds like a great idea, but I don't really understand how it would work.
Okay, well, that's a good segue into what I had wanted to raise today. I had a couple of thoughts on this. One is that the beauty of the public banking is that if you're going to form either a worker co-op, a worker-owned co-op, all right, it's a worker-owned co-op. Let's say it's a conversion of an existing business and the owner wants out. If they were to sell it on the open market, they would get X amount of dollars, but they offer it to the employees first. Well, the employees may not have much money to be able to buy a business and may not have the kind of credit. But that's where a public bank could come in and provide funding that then the employees build into the budget and pay off over time. And the same thing goes with housing. And one of the things that I've been thinking about, someone brought this up in I think it was a comment on one of the blogs, was that why don't we think in terms of if legalization of marijuana occurs, recreational marijuana, there will become stores, right, where you go to buy it. What if those were worker-owned co-ops? Because the fear is that what would happen is that there are these big companies that are out of state that have swooped in California and in Colorado and in Oregon and in other states, or is it Washington? I can't remember which, where it has been legalized, and they soak up all the profit. And so the money goes out of state other than the taxes. But if you had worker-owned cooperatives, for one, the workers would be paid better, and that could apply to any number of other kinds of new emerging industries or activities. It could apply to trying to build a better food to local food chains, so that if you needed somebody to process food or to store food or truck food, so that it stayed in the state. I mean, currently we raise a boatload of corn and then ship it out of state to get it made into tortillas. That doesn't make any sense. And then ship back here so we can buy tortillas. But there's no processing plant in Mexico to do that work. Same thing goes with the meat industry. There's no place here where we process beef. It's shipped to Colorado and then shipped back. Even local beef winds up getting shipped out of state. So that's one of the ways that the public bank can be a real linchpin. And so what I wanted to do today, and I'm feeling like we need to try and reconvene, like with a fuller group to have this discussion, but I just want to bat it around with you. It seems to me that, you know, we kind of went from the June primary to the November election to the Georgia election and now to the roundhouse with all these kinds of competing priorities that are keeping people from putting attention on the research. And I don't want to lose momentum, because I think the more I think about it, the more I think the Transformation Study Group has an opportunity to be a really vibrant twice a month meeting, if for nothing else but for conversation. But I also wonder if it wouldn't be, and that's where I think in terms of maybe interjecting a guest speaker periodically on something that's really stimulating and transformative, if you will. But on the other hand, I also wonder whether or not I'm thinking back to my days as a grant writer. If I didn't have a deadline, I would never get anything done. And I had a colleague of mine when I was a grant writer who sent me something, and I don't remember who to attribute the quote, but it was about writing novels. And it was like, when does an author sit back and go, oh, it's perfect? I mean, that just doesn't happen. You know, whenever you write something, you know it could be tightened up. And so I'm wondering whether or not not me setting deadlines, but people who are working on briefs said, I will have a draft by January 30th. Because I want to throw that open to people, and also throw open the idea that, you know, there were a number of people who had bitten off topics who, for very good personal reasons, had to like exit the group. Puck, I'm thinking of, and mostly the younger people who are the members, who are work interceded or family, and COVID and family and work make chaos if you've got kids. But we have cooperatives and democratizing the workplace. We have criminal justice reform and police reform. We have sustainable local development and agriculture and local food chains as things that are not being taken by anybody at this point. And so I'm wondering whether or not the combination of putting out an email saying, let's really all try to get together not next Wednesday, the Wednesday after next, but 27th, and have a conversation about those two things, about possible deadlines, possible emergence of people taking on other roles, other research areas, and so forth. So chime in. And Joyce, I'm going to make you visible, because I can't possibly tell whether you want to talk or not if you're not visible. And then maybe we can just hide that when you start to talk, if it's, so I'm asking you to start your video, so you should be able to do that. I see a raised hand too, so maybe that was Joyce. Any comments on that?
Well, I really like the idea of having speakers. I think it sets the stage, gets us thinking about an area that we might not be familiar with.
Mhm.
I do plan on meeting with her and possibly that other group that you mentioned, perhaps interviewing them. So I like the idea.
Okay. I'm going to hide you again because, well, now you don't have to if you're not going to talk because you were breaking up a little bit. Other comments from people?
Sounds pretty good to me. But you didn't mention water as a topic that's been dropped, but I dropped out of that because I just realized I'm never going to get to it. So is Norm Gaum going to be doing that?
Yeah, that's the thinking, but and I now all of a sudden we've got two more people. I wonder how long they've been sitting there.
And then just to follow up on that, in this case, he's such an expert that we wouldn't need for the water. Norm himself is such an expert, we wouldn't need a guest speaker, right? He could just be the
Right.
speaker.
Right. Well, Norm is doing it. I don't know his time frame, and that gets back. I'm going to try and catch up Charles and Rich. How long were you guys in the waiting room? Because after a while, I stopped looking. I hope you weren't there a long time.
You asking me?
Yeah, you first and then
For
Charles.
about 10 seconds or less.
Oh, well, that's amazing. And Charles? You'd have to unmute, Charles.
Ooh, nice.
I've been about 10 minutes.
Oh, okay. So one of the things I think I'll do is for the future is to send out my cell phone number, and then you can text me if you're there. Because after, the thing started at 4:30, so by 5:15, I sort of figure we've got everybody we got. So I'll very quickly catch Rich and Charles up. We had a conversation from
Wait, Paul, did you start the meeting earlier than 5:30?
We always do it at 4:30, don't we?
4:30?
Yeah.
It's always been 5:30. I don't know what happened.
Karen's trying to say something. You got,
You're
5:30?
muted.
Oh,
Yeah, that's why I looked at your email just because I was in another meeting and I thought, oh my God, it's at 4:30. How'd that happen? But yeah,
Yeah.
5:30 is what I've got.
Yeah, I would have been on there earlier if I realized that.
sorry about that. No one, that's the reason I always have a glass of wine with me. 5:30, not 4:30. And so, well, let me catch you up, and we'll let other people dissolve if they want, and we'll continue to talk for a few more minutes. But basically, we had a presentation by Marianne Dickinson, and we recorded it, so I can
good.
let you guys take a look at it. Everybody found it quite helpful and informative. I think it was less so for me because I kind of know an awful lot about that. I did a lot of housing work in the Bay Area as a professional. And so, yeah. And then we started talking about, that we have first of all, we wanted to get the idea of whether it was a good idea to involve, bye Carl, he's got Zoom number 4. Why?
What? I'm on the phone. I'm on the. Sorry,
That's
Karen
okay.
was knocking on the window to try to point something to me. Didn't realize I was in a meeting.
Okay, so part of what we discussed was, is it a good idea to have guest speakers periodically and have them take 15, 20 minutes? If we're going to be looking at a draft and it's going to take the whole time, then definitely not. But in between getting drafts, and people seem to think that was a good idea. So Rich and Charles, do you want to chime in on that? And then we'll get to the next thing that we were just talking about.
I suppose if the speaker is kind of on one of the topics that we're focusing on, and yes.
Okay.
I mean, I guess there's between housing co-ops and workers co-ops, kind of pretty different, very different. Although
Right.
I'm sorry I missed Mary Ann. I know Mary Ann. I would have been happy to hear her.
Yeah. Well, we have someone who's working on housing, so it was relevant there. And I'm very interested in and Charles.
That's true.
Charles got on because Charles had emailed me some time ago with what he had organized. And I'm sorry, Charles, in my nests of emails, I cannot find the document. So I was asking you if you could send it to me. But bottom line is he was saying in his.
I think it's
Go ahead, Charles.
it's in that special file that you sent for us to send them to.
Oh, it's on the folder. Okay, on the.
Yeah.
Okay, then I can get it. But one of the things.
Yeah, and that's,
Go ahead.
well, and that was my take on what I would present if I were like talking to Jeff Steinborn, okay?
Okay.
And I give him put in the references there that where he could take him to almost a library. He could go from there and search as deep as he wanted to, or stop as quick as he wanted to. And that was kind of that was the approach I took. But as I listened to what other people were saying, I was thinking to myself, well, my heavens, these are kind of getting into theses, and I never did something like that. And I really was kind of out of my depth.
Okay, well, now there's two more people, so I'm starting to see that they didn't read the email, or and I screwed up. So I may have to grab a glass of wine and hunker down. And we were adding Bruce and Adam now. And so Bruce and Adam, what I'd like to share with you is that I inadvertently scheduled this for 4:30 to 5:30, and half of the people on this, that's Rich, Charles, Adam, and now Bruce, didn't get that message and are getting on now because this is the regular time. And I didn't actually intend to accelerate the time or move it up. I did it by mistake. And so I apologize. And so I have recorded this. So the discussion with Mary Ann Dickinson will be available to anybody who wants to take a look at it. And that was about 40 minutes of the Zoom.
Did you give like a 2-minute synopsis of what she talked about?
She was talking about the different varieties of affordable housing using cooperative elements, and the barriers to implementing them, the examples existing in New Mexico and elsewhere, but pointing that there didn't seem to be a lot of energy in the room, not among us, among the legislators, for funding for housing, and it falls on localities who have limited funding, and that sometimes the regulations, and she cited HUD, make it difficult to actually develop affordable housing because the quality requirements and so forth are so high. And I kind of resist.
The quality requirements are so high?
Yeah, that's not something I'm familiar with. HUD
that doesn't sound right to me. They have housing quality standards, but it's like,
we don't want to develop shacks,
No, for sure not.
So that's a brief summary. And then what we shifted to was just the general concept of having an expert once in a while on a topic that's relevant. And I'll just put out the three things, and then we'll let Adam and Bruce and Charles comment, and Rich. The idea that we have lost a couple people, 3 or 4 people, mostly younger people. And so as a result of that, we've got some research areas where there are gaps where no one's doing it. And we wondered if there was interest in cooperative, and Charles had indicated to me, and he sort of said the same thing. He wants sort of to hand off the research he did to somebody who's got experience or feels comfortable writing these more extended briefs. And his work was on democratizing the economy with a focus on Mondragon in Spain and worker-owned cooperatives. And that is something I'm very interested in personally, because I really think there's a lot of applications in New Mexico, especially if you combine development of that with funding being generated through public banks, investment funding, and so forth, to launch worker-owned cooperatives. So that was one thing that we put out. Criminal justice and police reform was something that others had expressed interest in doing, but then Laura Brown grabbed it. And unfortunately, she grabbed it just before COVID. And she's the mom of 2 kids, has a full-time job, and kind of just said,
I think Terry said she'd be willing to get into that at some point. I mean, she was a long time public defender.
Oh, great. Did not know that.
Yeah,
and then
federal public defender.
The other 2 areas were sustainable local development, which we never really had anybody taking that on in any kind of substantive way or in any. And the final one I was looking at, I looked at the list and saw where we had gaps, was agriculture and local food chains, and so food supply chains. And so given that when I was talking about this, there were 5 people on because I gave the wrong timeout. Now we have 9, but there's still other people like Terry and so forth that, and Norm, where it might be worthwhile to have this discussion in 2 weeks where I get the link out and the time correct, like tomorrow. So it's not going out the day before and people can get it scheduled. And we could just have a good conversation about those 4 areas. And then the other area the other thing that I had mentioned was, do you think it makes sense to try and, in a kind of superficial way, impose or self-impose, so that the researchers self-impose a deadline for when they'll get things in? And the reason I mentioned that was, as a grant writer, federal grant writer, you had an airtight deadline. You know, it's not like you could say, oh man, I got to tighten this up tomorrow, I'll get to it then. You had to finish at 5 o'clock on the day it was due and get it in, or you didn't get any money or even get considered. And so I thought that, you know, with what has happened with our group, I think, is we went to the June primary, and that was a competing priority, then the November primary, then the January Georgia thing, and now the Roundhouse is starting up.
Yep.
So if we're going to get serious about producing the briefs, I know that after March, I don't see much coming on the horizon, but I'd like to have a conversation about whether people felt like they had the bandwidth to start imposing some kind of a deadline so that they could actually start we could get more briefs for review and completion. And so that's open for anybody who wants to make a comment about it. And then with the overarching thing of, do you think that it would make sense to do that in the context of working with the larger group in 2 weeks?
Yeah, Paul, I just in terms of like reigning in corporate power, I decided to abandon that temporarily so I can work on tax reform, because I knew that was going to be coming before the legislature, and reigning corporate power really would not. So my plan is to get back to that in April,
Okay.
Soon after the legislative session is
Okay,
over. I
Bruce.
think it's still critical, and I want to do it.
Bruce, you've got your hand up. You gotta unmute, Bruce. Bruce.
Okay. I'm wondering if we could have a discussion about what's going to happen to these briefs, which would help us determine what is a reasonable deadline. And if we have something like we're going to present it somewhere at some point in April, then the deadline might be the middle of March. Or I don't know, but I'd like to hear your thinking about where these briefs are going to go once we complete them. And therefore that might help us develop a timeline.
Okay, I'll answer that after. Are there other questions? I see a raised hand, but I don't know that that's really a person. I think that might be an artifact. Any other question? Okay,
So I have a question, Paul, that's related. It's not exactly about the deadline, but you know, for example, I talked to Antoinette today, and I mentioned about the tax brief, and she was really excited. She said, "Could you send it to me?" And I said, "Well, let me talk it over, because you know it may still need to be edited, and et cetera." My thought was at least to get her the executive summary, or at least a draft of the executive summary, something that she, you know, she's interested in. I don't care if she passes it on too. I wish she would. Do you see any reason not to do one or the other?
Okay, I'm going to answer Rich's first and then Bruce's. I don't see any reason, as long as you characterize it as, and that means the whole thing, that the whole thing, because the whole thing would have a formatting and, you know, more like word close edit by Roxanne, because that's something she's just brilliant at. As I learned today, she shredded stuff that I've been writing and made it so much better. I'll ask, so I would say, as long as you say, this is a draft, we're working on it, it's got one more pass or something like that, and then, you know, she can take a look at it and hopefully, and I think we're going to get to the editing of it fairly soon. I think Paula wrote that she was willing to take a stab at it, and just the reorg, not the close edit. And so maybe we'll be able to get that within the next couple of weeks, so that you'd have it before then.
Yeah, but it'd be good to be able to give people now something that they can use as the legislative session's about to get underway.
Right, right. No, I think that's fine. And I just want to reaffirm that once the reorg is done, you and Terry have ownership over this at this point, really. And you will take a look at it and go, oh, that actually did work.
Yeah. Oh, I'm certainly open to that possibility.
Or no, I think you kind of messed up our work, in which case we go back to your work and then do the
and just as an add on to all of that, you know, I had submitted a one-pager on tax reform to you, and you were going to look at it, and I can't remember what was. Is that something? You haven't added it to the website yet, but are you planning to? Or are you?
Roxanne's doing another edit of it today.
Oh, okay.
Basically, what we did was we used a big chunk of what you had done, but we have kind of a format that we use. Plus, as I looked at a bunch of stuff, I started thinking about for a one-pager, like taxes and revenue bill is so different from every other bill. It's not like it's a thing.
You cut out for a second. I missed. Can you repeat that sentence?
I'll get rid of my video.
You became static.
All right, maybe this will be easier. The tax and revenue bill is so different because it's comprised of so many elements that it's not like a thing that's easy to condense into a page. And so I hope you saw that I took pretty much your entire executive summary and used it as part of a post.
I did. I did see that, yeah.
To you and Terry. And so I've done more or less the same thing with the one pager, which is not a pager, it's a two pager. And one of the things we did was now Voices has created, you know, how they had their bulleted list of things we could do, from progressivizing the PIT and, you know, and all the different kinds of different things that could be done to generate more revenue. Well, they've attached estimates to how much that would generate in a year.
Oh, cool.
We put that in and replaced what, because they were very closely aligned, what you said and what they said. But I put that in there, and I'll send it to you. We'll probably have it tomorrow, midday tomorrow. Roxanne worked on it. She made
Okay, well, that's great. I was hoping somebody could find those figures. So if they
Yeah,
did,
I
that's
kept
wonderful.
having that on my agenda to do, but it's such a hard thing that it wound up being the thing that didn't get checked off every day.
You know, and there are two bills in the Senate, by the way, by two bills, Tallman and O'Neill. And one really virtually repeals the O'Neill's Richardson tax cuts, and Tallman's is really not good. It raises taxes on the middle class while just moving slightly in the right direction on the upper income people. So anyway, there's already one good prototype, and that's Bill O'Neill
Okay,
for PIT.
okay, Bill O'Neill. And now I got to get to Bruce's before he falls asleep.
Yeah. Right, of course. I'm sorry.
Bruce, the plan, you know, obviously if we get one brief and it's done and it's beautiful, we have no other briefs. We don't have a booklet, we have a brief. And so that would be published on the blog, giving full attribution. In the case of Rich's, which I kind of remember, wasn't it about 32 pages, Rich?
Maybe 23, but
Oh, 23?
20, 21, 22, somewhere in there.
Okay, 2021, with some graphics and stuff like that. We would just publish it, you know, as a kind of guest blog. That's with attribution of the person who wrote it and with their agreement that they want it done that way. But the intent when we're done, and for that we would need, you know, 6, 8 briefs, is to publish it as a booklet. And that would be, you know, we're not going to try and sell it. We would have it available for review by anyone, and, you know, probably have a link on the homepage that said Transformation Study Group publication. We'd probably come up with a better title. Transforming New Mexico or something. And that would be published there. If downstream we thought, wow, this is good enough to get published, then we'd talk about it. But self-publishing, I doubt. That's as Bruce knows, that's not an easy thing to do, as he's got a self-published book. Go ahead,
So,
Bruce.
I guess I'm thinking more along the lines of how we could, not just publishing it, but, you know, some advocacy work. Like, are we going to take whatever it is, something about agriculture or energy or whatever it happens to be, and try to get it either before a legislative committee or maybe have a statewide panel with some experts or some legislators, something that's going to be more than just put it on the website or put it in a blog, something that's going to, you know, give it some impetus towards actually implementation.
Well, that's a good idea. I mean, I'm seeing people nod their heads and so forth. I think that the way, and this is something we could all discuss, but the concept of having a almost like a mini conference around it.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of you were at the expo, and I think if we did that, it would be on Zoom, even if COVID's gone, because people aren't likely to drive from Las Cruces to Santa Fe to participate in something like that. But I was impressed. I mean, they had technical problems on the expo, but they had 300-400 people and multiple rooms where you could go. And like if Bruce had his thing on democracy and Rich had one on corporations and Terry had one on tax revenue and Joyce had hers on housing and Adam had his, and Karen had hers on renewable energy. We could have rooms for those, and they would present. The way they did it in the expo on Saturday was the rooms repeated their thing 2 or 3 times, 2 times in that, but we could do it 3 times. so that someone could go from Adams to Rich's to Karen's.
How many
And
were in a room at one time, Paul?
it depended from, well, part of the problem for Retake was that on our end, not on their end, we lost the internet. I mean, we had absolutely no internet. And so no one, we had a room open and no one there. But
Was it because of your internet problem personally?
Yeah,
Oh, it
it
was,
was
okay.
And that's the first time that's happened. And frankly, I'd much rather it happened there than when we were hosting a Zoominar with 300 people. But it worked quite well. And I'd say they had anywhere from 20 or 30 to 50 or 60 in different rooms, depending on the room. Because the thing about that I wouldn't do the way they did it, I think they had like 30 or 40 rooms. And so, wow. and you know, and there wasn't a real good description of each room. It was just the name of the organization. So Retake Our Democracy was competing with something like some kind of, you know, the Green New Deal or the Green Amendment or drought water policy or something like that. And so, you know, you'd want it, we would do it differently, but the framework on Zoom is really powerful. And then, you know, by doing it that way, we would also be able to get feedback on what we've done. And then that would generate more interest in the individual and collective publication. And then getting to Bruce's comment about using it also to testify at interim hearings. I mean, and working with legislators to introduce legislation. I totally think that's one of the outgrowths of it. And obviously we wouldn't do an interim hearing or any hearing where we're presenting all of the things because they'd be all over the map. But, you know, when legislative finance council's having a meeting on tax reform, we would, you know, work hard to make sure that Rich and Terry were presenting there. So Bruce, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, so let's say, just for argument's sake at this point, we want to do that Zoom conference you just discussed maybe next October. So then work backwards from October in terms of how to set that up. And then would it make sense, or would a timeline for us to get our briefs in be, I don't know, May 1st or something? And so that then there would be the editing and et cetera, and then the pre-publication working up to the October Zoom conference.
That makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense.
That's a scenario. I mean, you know, that's, you know, I'm just throwing that out, but
right,
it's a
right. And Roxanne and I haven't completely consolidated what this is going to look like, but part of what we want to do after March is step back a bit from like the grind of alerts and 4 blogs or 5 blogs a week and start working on bigger picture writing and the like. And so this is the one thing that would definitely still continue to fit in that. And so, so that all makes a lot of sense. And the time frame of October and all of that is a good one. Paula, you had your hand up.
Yeah, I like what Bruce said. I've also, as you're talking, I'm getting the feeling that we're doing what Think New Mexico does, only we're a volunteer organization. And I wonder if it would help to, when you stop in March, to look around, to just see what their model is and either work from it, you know, take some examples from it, some good stuff from it, and not do the rest.
Well, you know what? That's also a good idea. I think one of the things we would do, because Think New Mexico isn't the only one, but you know, there was the booklet that the Voices for Children just did on tax reform and equity in the tax And so we could look like that might also give writers an idea that, you know, if you're going to do this and we ultimately want to publish each one of these as individual booklets as well as collective, a collection of booklets, then there are certain things like page numbers that work and page numbers that don't, and formats that you can look at that are like, okay, you know, cover page, table of contents, you know, acknowledgement, whatever, and either 8 pages, 16 pages, 24. There's certain page numbers that actually work or don't work. And for a layout, if you're going to try and print it, it's not as important when you're doing it online because you're not dealing with paper that has to, you know, you've got a front page and a back page, et cetera, and stitched so that you're, you know, you're either going 4 pages, 8 pages, 16, 24 or whatnot. So how does that sound to people? I think that could be something that would be more easily done, like you said, in March after the session.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing to think of is, I like the idea. I definitely think we need deadline or deadlines. So I certainly do. And I think something like what Bruce described, where you have a sort of a rollout to the public, if you will, of our product. But I'm thinking we should have an intermediate step where we have our individual contributions, and then all of us, and we should probably have maybe selectively invite other experts or commentators to help us sort of distill out of all these separate products some sort of overarching, I guess, message or conclusions. And that I think is a key step, because otherwise we're just going to throw out, you know, like 8, 10, 12 different things for different audiences. And I think part of our goal is to have something like, here's kind of what this process has taught us about politics in the US or in New Mexico today and where we need to go. And so if we said, okay, we're going to have our briefs done by May 1st, then sometime in June or July or whatever, we have this sort of intermediate step, then October or whatever date we decide, now we go public.
So I like that too. I think that maybe the step would be we get them done, let's say by May, and then we all read them. And then we internally have a brainstorm that wouldn't be an hour, it'd be a couple hours at least. And we're talking, and you know, collectively we could put out like, this is a framework we're looking for comment. And people would be prepared to think about what are the lessons learned overall? What are the thematic continuity in terms of national trends, New Mexico trends, barriers, opportunities, and how do they do they tie together in some way? Like, can
many of them do.
Huh?
I think we already know that many of them interlock. And
Right. Bruce, you have your hand up.
Yeah. So another step might be some kind of executive summary booklet, so that each one of these topics just has a page or two, so that if somebody, you know, can see the overall picture in a let's say that, I don't know, there's 15 topics, so that would in itself would be a 15 or 25 page little booklet. And then if whatever legislator or whoever, some CEO somewhere wants to go deeper into one of the topics, then you refer them to the bigger 12 page thing, so that you have two documents. You have the one where's all the executive summaries, and then you have the reference to the bigger document.
So what I think I'm going to do, and I'll give it to Paula in just a sec, is I'm going to summarize this and send it out to the full group. I'm also going to do a bit more recruitment, because as I mentioned earlier, we got 3 or 4 areas that people are not working on right now, and it would be good to have those working being worked on. And then we'll, on the 27th, we'll have a fuller discussion of this where we've got, you know, the rest of the folks, although there may not be as many missing that aren't permanently missing. I mean, Norm tends not to come, but he is working on something. And Terry tends to come and is working and has basically finished something. And there are a few other people who tend to be here who are not here. And so maybe if we have a fuller group, we can really come to a consensus, if you will, and maybe with 1 or 2 new people. And if we do have 1 or 2 new people, what I'll do is I'll schedule the Zoom for 5:30, but I'll start at 5 for the new people so that I can get them oriented so you don't have to listen to me explaining what we're doing. Paula, you had your hand up.
Well, I think this is a little premature. You know, Bruce, I liked what you said originally, but this one idea of having 2 booklets, let me tell you my experience. I did an exhibition back in 2001, and we went to the Sackler Museum at the Smithsonian to ask how you write a book, how you do things. And they said that they had a special exhibition, I don't remember what it was, and they had a book for grown-ups and a book for children. And the book for children sold out, and they couldn't sell the book for grown-ups because the grown-ups don't read anymore either. So if you have a separate booklet just of the executive summaries, that's what people will look at. They'll never bother to go to the other. So I think it would be a great idea to think of each report as a chapter, and you've got the executive summary in the beginning of it. But that's just my experience.
Yeah, I think that analogy may not hold in this situation because we're not talking about children and grown-ups. And there may be some people like what I'm planning to do is send Antoinette a draft of the executive summary of our tax brief, and then ask her to let me know if she wants to see the rest of it.
I think that's what Paul is sort of suggesting.
Oh, okay. I thought you're saying if you have 2 of these, they're only going to go to 1. I wasn't clear.
My point is, don't make 2.
Well,
put the
yeah.
executive summary in the front of each chapter of each report, and then people will have to open up one book.
Oh, okay. I
They
see.
can either see the executive summary and just do the executive summary, or then they have the opportunity to look at the whole report. Because like your report, you did that important background material. People might want to read that. Even if they just look at the executive summary, they might just want to see the background material report that you did, part of the report.
You know, the interesting
And
thing
also, or that the advantage of that is somebody reads the executive summary, then reads the chapter because it draws them in. And then later on, when they're talking with somebody else about maybe another legislator, they can just go back to the executive summary and say, yeah, this has the ideas in a nutshell that I can really present to my colleagues.
Exactly. I mean, if you're not charging for the book, it doesn't matter if you put it all together.
Right.
It may be very heavy, though. I don't know.
They're great ideas. And I think that one of the things I need to do a better job of, and having this recorded will make it easier, is for me to go, because I can't take notes and moderate and listen very well. But to just make sure that what we've talked about is captured, because I think it will help others and new people have a better picture of what we're trying to do. You know, I wrote up that thing that was a protocol or whatever, but that was when we got started and we didn't know what we were doing. And so, you know, you sort of learn by doing, and then you go back and go, oh, okay, now I see how this should have been done. And so I can work on that. I think with the looming legislative session, doing anything on our end of any substance is going to be, I can make promises all I want, but you know, there's only so much time in a day. And so with that, are there other comments or questions or thoughts about future direction? And if not, we'll just say adieu. I'll go pour a glass of wine and make dinner. And although Roxanne's probably already got it ready. So are there other comments or thoughts?
Well, when we're done, I just wanted to touch base with you, Paul, about my conversation with Melanie Stansberry the other day about
Okay.
water. So I don't know if you got my email on that.
I did. I did.
Oh, you did? Okay, maybe that's sufficient, but
Well, no, I'll chat a little bit more.
yeah, okay, all right, sounds good.
Anyway, Greg may want to sit in on that because he's Mr. Water guy. In any case, thank you all. And I will send out something in the next day or so. Hopefully I'll just do it tomorrow, even though tomorrow's day from hell. Because otherwise it just keeps drifting off. And that'll just be with Zoom invite time at 5:30 and good agenda and hopefully even a summary of what we discussed.
Okay.
Thanks very
All
much.
right, great.
Bye-bye,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.
Except for
Bye.
Rich and
Bye.
Yeah, I'll stay on.
well, you can tell us if other people, okay. We're down to the three of us. Maybe Bruce wants to listen, but what did you want to share there, Rich?
Well, after a meeting that we had earlier, then in our group, it was an indivisible meeting in which Norm was the speaker. And he, I'm speaking from this as not really knowing really much of anything of the content of Norm's work. I'd like to know more at some point, but I really don't. But in his presentation to Indivisible Nob Hill, Norm said that he was really taken aback that Melanie seemed to have withdrawn. And you mentioned that in an earlier meeting, Paul, her support for some water bill, and a big water bill, and so I had an opportunity to talk to Melanie because I'm a member of the State Central Committee, and they all want to talk to me, and I'm sure you too, Paul, and anybody who's on the State Central Committee, those who are running for Congress.
Right.
So that's how I ended up talking with Melanie for about 40 minutes a few days ago. But I did ask her briefly, as I said I would, about the water bill. I just wanted to hear what she had to say about that, letting her know I didn't know a whole lot about it. And in fact, most of my knowledge of water law was one semester of water law almost 30 years ago in law school. She said that, first she said she was disappointed that Norm didn't reach out to her to talk about it before bringing it to the Indivisible group. And in fact, she got 10 calls from Indivisible members saying, what the hell's going on here? And, of course, I'm asking the same thing, maybe not with that kind of tone, but she said that that for her, and she's been involved in water stuff for a very long time. In fact, it turns out we both had worked on this at different times, this huge water case called the Amet case in northern New Mexico that lasted 30 or 40 years. And she said that there and she's a sociologist originally, and that as a sociologist, there's a whole lot of cultural elements to all these water issues, and that it's a difficult lift to get the kind of omnibus water bill she'd like to see. And maybe that's the one, in fact, that Norm was referring to. I don't know.
Right, that is.
It is, okay. And she said that she thinks it's likely to be a 10-year project. And she said there were two agencies that would really have to sign on to make that bill feasible. And one was the Office of the Engineer,
right?
That controls water throughout the state. And the other was the New Mexico Environmental Department. And they both have their hands full. They don't want to even begin to take a look at it to consider whether to sign on to it this session. NMED in particular has its hands full dealing with with COVID. I didn't realize that they actually had a role in this, but they supposedly are enforcing like COVID regulations regarding restaurants and maybe places of employment. And so neither agency really wanted to consider signing on to it. And she only didn't think there was any chance of getting it through the legislature if they didn't sign on.
So
Now, I don't know if that's just a dodge but that's what she told me. I mean, she seems like a pretty intelligent person.
right. And what she said is what she told me, and what she told this, I can't remember the name of the coalition that she spoke with, but it was last week, and Rebecca Dow was on this also talking about some other bill. I think that's accurate, but what Norm would say is it's always going to be a fucking heavy lift. And he's been in this for 40 years, and he's just sick of having people say they're going to do it and then not. And so both could be true. You know, I mean,
Right.
it could be that, and I wouldn't be surprised also if it was such a heavy lift that now that she's running for Congress, she doesn't have the time.
Yeah, well, yeah.
You know, because we've heard the same thing about Cedillo Lopez now, that, you know, she's having some difficulty being lead on some things or some current concerns that she might be. And don't share that with her, because she's my choice for
I know.
And don't tell Melanie I said that. But I'm avoiding that call.
Well, one thing that Antoinette said this afternoon was that on her fracking bill, she wasn't able to get a single member of the House to co-sponsor it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's astounding.
Well, no.
No?
In our gas and oil state, I mean, we don't have it as a priority transformational bill. You know, one of our criteria is if it's dead in the water, why? You know, every once in a while, there's a reason to pontificate and have something out there to just say we're for it because it's good. But, you know, it won't get out of the first committee probably. So
is that what she was going to take the lead on that you were referring to, or is there something else?
No, Green Amendment was the one that she's lead sponsors on. But they've got quite a few sponsors.
And she's going to continue, right?
Oh yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
The heavy lifting behind the scenes she can't do. And she's got several bills. So, you know, she's working on quite a few things. And so yeah, that's my read on the water bill, but we're removing it from our list altogether, not even priority bill, because it's not going to be introduced. And so probably by Friday, we're going to be sending out a survey to the people who are on the Senate district teams, which is about 200 now, to ask them to take this survey, and it's going to include, I think, 12 of the priority bills to identify, and we're going to use that to inform a process. So it's not just Roxanne and I making a decision of like, okay, who do we elevate up into the transformational bills? And it's likely that we'll go beyond 15, but we want to get input from other people. So we'll get that out. I've got like a radio show and 3 Zoominars. So that's enough.
Typical day.
Yeah.
Get some wine and get some rest.
Yeah. Anyway, so thank you for that report, Rich. And Norm is working on the bill. He's not, you know, when we did the Zoominar with him, he was right there all the time, you know, getting back to me all the time. He helped edit the post I did on water policy and the need for better governance. And it was like we were tied at the hip. But since then, it's been harder to get his attention. Not impossible, but harder. So anyway, thanks you guys. And we will definitely stay in touch. And I appreciate all of your input, insight, and good humor.
Well, thanks for keeping this, this train moving.
Okay, well, no, I'm encouraged by what I heard today, because I was sort of feeling when 4:30 rolled around, I looked at the Zoom responses who registered, and there were 3 people. And I'm going like, oh man, are we
Yeah,
losing?
well, you know, I get so many emails. I see an email from you about this, and I pin it somewhere, and I say, okay, I'll get on here tomorrow at 5:35:25. So I didn't really open it up and see the time, nor did I even know until the moment that I got on that I needed to register first, because I don't remember that being the case before. So
Yeah, well, we will get better at this. Well, that's the first time I did that, but in all fairness,
registration.
but I did blow it. So at least I'll admit it. So, Callie,
How can we find the that recording of Mary Ann's presentation?
oh, glad you said that. Well, you could have recording of Zoom. There is a way to actually host it on, put it on our Google Drive. And so I'll see if I can figure that out, but otherwise I'll upload it to our YouTube station and send you a link.
Okay, I can handle YouTube. I can't handle Google Drive.
All right, you got it. Take care.
Take
All right,
care.
you too.
Good night.
Bye.